Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to this debate on form and ritual, power and prejudice. Thank you so much for joining us. So from greetings and introductions to loves and relationships, church services and dances, formality and ritual were once a central part of our lives. But form and ritual have been in retreats for more than a century now. Many see it as a formality, as outdated and unnecessary sign of deference, and welcome a less constrained, more open culture. Should we see formality and ritual as a power play that embeds hierarchy and prejudice and seek to eradicate it? Or might the abandonment of ritual be a contemporary mistake? As social rules, are social rules, as some in the Me Too movement have argued, a defense for the vulnerable? And can ritual lift us out of the mundane and everyday to higher and better goals? To discuss these very topical issues, I'm joined by a wonderful panel of speakers. Historian of ideas and lecturer on the history of political thought at King's College London, Hannah Dawson is one of the leading experts on how thought itself has changed over the centuries. Also on the panel is Distinguished Professor of Religion and Society at Lancaster University, Linda Woodhead, who has an MBE for her services to higher education and is one of the leading experts in the world on Christianity. Noel Carroll is a renowned philosopher of art whose most celebrated work includes The Philosophy of Horror and Humour, a very short introduction. His expertise covers the philosophy of cinema, theatre, fine art, dance, and just about any artistic medium that you can think of. So welcome to our panel, and thank you to all of you who are joining us here today. The way this is going to go is each of our speakers will now have 3 minutes to lay out their position in their pitch, and I'm going to ask the first speaker to come up today, if that's possible. Hannah Dawson, could you lay out for us in 3 minutes whether we should seek to eradicate formality and ritual?
Thank you, Myriam, and hello, everybody. I think that we need to be very wary of formality and ritual because I think that they can be means of oppressing people. And I think that they can oppress people in two ways that I'm going to lay out now. So the first one is that I think that formality and ritual can actually bring into being and reinforce hierarchies, illegitimate hierarchies between individuals. So if you think of something very basic, like bowing and curtsying, these things seem very small and insignificant. But I think that there's a way in which they that by bowing and by curtsying, we start to embody relations of power. And if we think about the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, he had this idea of habitus, which was the idea that small acts of moving our bodies, of practice in the world, they embody power relations, so that when we bow, we come to feel ourselves inferior. When we are bowed at, we come to feel ourselves superior. So it creates, rituals create realities. They create social realities. And even rituals that seem very insignificant and harmless, even polite and helpful, like, for example, opening a door for a woman, saying ladies first, that reinforces particular stereotypes of weakness and of difference and of dependency between the sexes. And the second way in which I think that we have to be wary of formality and ritual because they can oppress people is that in invoking formality and being polite and being civil and obeying the rules, telling people to watch their tone or calm down, be civil, we can often be suppressing, we can be crushing, we can be silencing legitimate anger and resistance. So, for example, if we think about the recent Black Lives Matter movement, this elicited a kind of backlash of people saying, be civil, be kind, as though somehow calling out racism were worse than the racism that was being called out. Civility, it seems to me, formality is often used as a mask for a justification for oppression. And we see that very clearly if we think historically about the whole idea of the civilizing mission, where actually, which was all about legitimizing empire, where actually what is coded as civil is in fact the very thing that causes the most kind of barbarism. And this leads on to my kind of final thought, which is that often one needs to be uncivil. One needs to break the rules in order to stand up against injustice. And I'd like to end with a quote from Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist theorist, who says, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. Power, oppression, injustice rely on quiet submission to the rules. The only way in which we can actually progress, in which we can bring justice about in a society, is by standing up to it in an uncivil way." Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Hannah. Lots of food for thought to kick us off there. And next up, I'd like to put the same question to Linda Woodhead. Should we seek to eradicate formality and ritual?
Thanks very much. I was just reading a book which I really recommend called Paper Cuts by Stephen Bernard, and it's rather a harrowing story about his sexual abuse and rape by a Catholic priest when he was a young boy. Stephen Bernard is now an academic at Oxford University, and he talks about how difficult it has been to hold his life together as a victim of abuse, and about the medication he's on, about the therapy he has to have, about the sheer difficulty of keeping his identity together, having had it ripped apart so repeatedly. And one thing that struck me in this is that he says that every night when he goes to bed, he writes a note about what he did that day at work and what he has to do in the morning. So that when he wakes up, the first thing he does is pick up that piece of paper and look at who he is. It's a ritual. It's essential to holding him together. And I'm going to argue that we need to keep ritual and formality for two reasons. It's focusing and it's fortifying. Let me just say what I mean by ritual. Ritual is repetition. It's bodily. It has to include the bodily in quite a profound way. Good rituals do things that to do with things like eating or being covered in water or sex or very bodily things. So repetition, body, but also some intention. You're intentionally doing these things, and attention. You're paying attention when you're doing those things. So ritual in that sense, I think we just all have them and we'd fall apart without them. I start every day with a cup of tea in bed, brought by my husband, who's not very civil, and he's not a particularly good ritual practitioner. I have to make him do this, but it's a very essential ritual for me. I just could not start the day without it. And I do pay attention, and I do try and gather myself together, and it's very, very important. So small things, they can give a focus. I've talked about them as a focus. There's a great ritual theorist called Jonathan Z. Phillips who talks about ritual as a focusing lens, and he gives the example of tribes he worked with. He's an anthropologist who before a hunt always do a ritual in which they're playing through what they're going to do in the hunt. They're getting themselves into that mind. They're focusing on the perfect hunt so that they can then put that into action. I think sports people do something similar these days. So focusing and fortifying. And we need fortification. It's about support. We support ourselves. God knows we need support these days. And we can have our own personal rituals to support ourselves. It's very nice sometimes when you have collective rituals that give you solidarity and support, particularly if you're an oppressed group trying to have a stand. Hannah made some excellent points. I don't disagree, ritual can be abused, but think how important it was in the USA, for example, in slaves being able to stand together and keep going and have a common voice.
Thank you so much, Linda. Noel, should we seek to eradicate formality and ritual?
Well, let me start by just saying I'm not really comfortable with the terms of the discussion for two reasons. First, because it runs together two notions, that of ritual and that of formality. They may overlap, but there are important differences between them that will certainly actually have already complicated our discussion. Rituals are, in important respects, practices that we set aside. We put them off from the flow of everyday life. They're events that are made special. They're platforms for all sorts of things. Formalities, on the other hand, are indispensable to the flow of life, or at least some of them. Queuing, for example. We may sometimes call some everyday formalities rituals, but that, I think, is to speak merely figuratively, perhaps as a way to disparage them as outmoded. My second reason for discomfort is its generality. It sounds as if we're being asked to rule on all formalities and all rituals. That seems to me quixotic. Formalities and rituals evolve socially to serve purposes, which they do badly or well or indifferently. The purposes, in turn, that they serve are needful, useful, optimal, or benign, and will be judged in terms of, among other things, their necessity, their efficiency, their fitness in the context they occur, and their justice and fairness, of course, as Hannah Dawson was emphasizing. How we stand on an example of formality or a specific ritual will depend upon our consideration of the purposes they serve, first and foremost, as well as the degree to which they do or don't serve them. So my view, in my view, a summary verdict on all formality along with all ritual would be very ill-advised. I don't know who planned the order of this, but somehow mystically they put me in the position of the some do, some don't position. Maybe just because somebody said, oh, he's a philosopher, they thought that that's where he would wind up. But of course, I agree with the points that both the previous speakers have made. Hannah gave especially good examples of misuse of formalities and rituals, and Linda actually anticipated a number of the things I was going to say about the power of ritual to foster attention, focusing, and fortification, as will become evident, I think, of rituals, especially in terms of their capacity to cause emotional unity as a means of attention and focus and fortification. Thanks.
Thank you so much to our speakers for laying out their position there. Now let's dive straight into it. Our traditions have been long-standing, and we do things a certain way, be they due to customs, morality, or religion. We're speaking here from the United Kingdom, where to be knighted is to be knighted by the royal family in a very ritualistic process, which some might argue reinforces social class by rendering certain groups within society able to bestow certain honours over others and elevate them, as it were, socially and economically. But rituals mark key moments in our lives, be they marriage or funeral.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.